In this video, we will be discussing what loneliness is, why it happens, and how to overcome it using excerpts from Krishnamurti. This video extends upon Kay's talks by clarifying some of the points he raised. The unique feature of this channel is that we provide simple diagrams that explain Kay's concepts so you can understand him more easily. So let's jump into the first video.
What is loneliness? Not to have any relationship with anything, with nature, with another, with the friend or woman or the man with whom I've lived. All that somehow has withdrawn. I'm left utterly empty, lonely. Why?
When we are by ourselves without any distractions, we come face to face with the mind we have built, a mind that is deeply insecure. Loneliness arises out of that insecurity and is experienced as a sense of isolation.
All of human beings go through this sense of complete isolation in which there is no relationship with anything. It is,
Loneliness is an automatic behaviour that is triggered when certain conditions are met. Krishnamurti references that the absence of relationship is the trigger that causes loneliness, and in another talk mentions that a self-centered way of thinking is the condition in the brain that causes loneliness to arise when we are by ourselves.
Loneliness comes when all our days are spent in self-centeredness. The very activity of self-centeredness is producing loneliness, right? Because it's narrowing my whole or the vast, extraordinary existence of life into a small little me.
Krishnamurti says that the isolation we feel in loneliness is the unintended consequence of a self-centered way of thinking, but the link between these two is not made clear. Why should self-centeredness produce a feeling of isolation? To explore this question, we have to understand self-centeredness, and to understand self-centeredness, we have to understand the self that these thoughts are centered around. The self is what we consider ourselves to be. The self is what we refer to when we use the words I and me. The self is a fusion of two forms. The physical form, the body, the thing you see when you look in the mirror, and the psychological form, the image we hold of ourselves, which we see appear in the mind. The self is further expanded through association with objects, people, and concepts. When the self is associated to a house, we say my house. When the self is associated to a person, we say my wife. When we associate something to me, we create the notion of my. This is the process responsible for self-centeredness, and it causes us to think in terms of ourselves. My country, my religion, my pain, my pleasure, my future, and so on. Krishnamurti identified that loneliness arises due to this way of thinking, but why did he say that? The reason comes down to value. Every association we make has a value. We associate ourselves to a name. This enables someone to call out the name and get our attention. That is its value. We associate ourselves to a profession. This enables us to offer assistance when someone has a problem. That is its value. The associations build up a network of value, and we consider that to be the value of ourselves. The important thing to realise is that each association only has value in a specific situation. When someone is calling out my name has value. When someone is not calling out my name has no value. When something needs fixing, my profession has value. When something does not need fixing, my profession has no value. What we observe when we are alone is that all the associations we have built have no value. When I am alone, my name has no value. When I am alone, my 1,000,000 followers have no value. When I am alone, my reputation in the community has no value, and so on. When we are alone, all the value we have built into ourselves evaporates, and we feel like we are meaningless and the way we live our lives is meaningless. At the same moment, we feel deeply lost. This is because the things we associate ourselves to give us a sense of purpose and direction, and that makes us feel like we know where we're going in life. When we are alone and the value disappears, so too does the purpose and direction it gives us. That is loneliness, the experience of isolation, the sense of being an empty void with nowhere to go, and we look at our minds as if they're a barren land. That is why Krishnamurti stated the relationship between self-centeredness and loneliness. The more energy you pour into building up the image of yourself, the harder you are going to fall when you are alone and all that value disperses.
Alone, the word alone means all one, whereas loneliness is complete isolation from everything. Haven't you felt this?
Krishnamurti brings out a distinction between aloneness and loneliness. We have all experienced loneliness when we are alone, but similarly we have been alone and not experienced loneliness. This shows us that loneliness is not an inevitable consequence of being alone, but is something that is triggered only when certain conditions are met. This raises the possibility of being free from loneliness, but only if it is possible to free the mind of the condition that is responsible for loneliness. You can think of loneliness as an allergy to being alone. To discover whether it is possible to end loneliness, we must first uncover the condition that is responsible for it. When you begin to undertake this inquiry, you will first become aware of your compulsion to escape from loneliness. Your compulsion to escape from loneliness is your first barrier to inquiring into loneliness, so you must explore this barrier first. The isolation we feel through the experience of loneliness causes us to suffer. We escape from the immediate experience of loneliness by distracting ourselves with entertainment. Later, after the loneliness experience has ended, we remember that experience of loneliness and develop a fear of it happening again. Not knowing how to change the condition responsible for loneliness, we seek to circumvent its trigger, being alone. To avoid being alone, we attach ourselves to people.
Therefore, I'm escaping from that feeling of extraordinary isolation through attachment of another. Right?
Krishnamurti addresses that escape through distraction or escape through avoidance is insufficient because it leaves the condition responsible for loneliness intact. In addition to leaving loneliness intact, attachment distorts how we think. When we attach ourselves to a person, such as a partner or a family member, we may be quick to take their side in an argument and quick to reject any sense of wrongdoing on their part, irrespective of what the truth is. When we attach ourselves to a belief, such as a religious belief, we may be quick to accept anything that confirms our belief, and similarly quick to reject anything that contradicts it, yet again irrespective of what is actually true. As well as distorting thinking, attachment establishes new ways the mind can suffer. For instance, let's say you get a new girlfriend. Prior to knowing that girl, you never had any thoughts about her or any feelings about her. But soon, after you enter the relationship, you may begin to worry if she comes home late. You may begin to see the other men in her life as a threat, or feel embarrassed when she behaves a certain way in public. Krishnamurti explained that the fear of loneliness is so strong that we put up with all the detrimental consequences of attachment at any cost.
So what is this loneliness? Which causes, you understand, sir? Which causes attachment, holding on to something, however illusory, however false, however meaningless. I hold on to my wife. I hold on to my club, to my God, to my ritual, to my friends, because if I let go, I'm utterly lonely.
The tragedy of escape through attachment is that the mind becomes occupied with the issues that surround the attachment and neglects to consider why it attached to that thing in the first place. For instance, we spend all our time trying to keep a relationship afloat while neglecting to investigate why we entered into that relationship in the first place. After nurturing attachment for so many years, the mind is liable to completely forget the loneliness it was running away from. While we may forget the loneliness we experienced in the past, we remain tortured by the attachments we maintain in the present. Krishnamurti reminds people of loneliness and the feelings they felt in the midst of loneliness in the past. He challenges people to confront that experience again, remain with it, and observe it. He wants people to rekindle their relationship to the experience of loneliness that they ran away from in the past. This is essential because escape does not just leave fear intact, it actually acts to increase the level of fear that we feel.
Now, can you look at that loneliness without any conclusion, without wanting to go beyond it, wanting to overcome it? The wanting to overcome it is another form of escape. But just to look at it, then you will see, because you are no longer escaping and therefore wasting no energy, then you can look, and when you observe totally, the thing is not.
When we cease to escape from an experience, we remain with it in a state of observation. Through observation, we learn about the thing we are observing. Experiences such as loneliness arise due to the way we are conditioned. By observing loneliness, we learn about loneliness, and that learning transforms the condition responsible for loneliness. As we are observing loneliness, loneliness is transforming. And this is the process of transformation Krishnamurti referred to. For some of you, there will be a sense of disbelief that observation alone has the capacity to change behaviour. This is because most people are accustomed to change through force and coercion. We attempt to change our behaviour by battling with it, or through convincing ourselves to think and feel differently. We see force and coercion work in our relationship to the physical world. We are required to use force to move heavy objects, and we are required to use coercion to inspire a lazy person into action. Psychologically, however, force and coercion do not work. How many years have you been battling with your problems, or trying to outsmart your problems, to no avail? So, if force and coercion do not work to solve our psychological problems, why do we maintain this approach? It appears that we maintain the approach for two reasons. The first is that we do not know any other way to deal with our problems, so we feel more comfortable staying with something that doesn't work and hoping that one day it will. The second is that our successes with force and coercion in the physical world cause us to ignore their failures in the psychological world. One of our errors is that we do not realize that the physical world and the psychological world play by different rules. Our insistence on psychological change through force and coercion makes us seek out methods that promise change. The inability of the method to change us immediately causes us to repeat the method, hoping that in the future it will give us the change we want. The repetition of the method is what we call practice, and practice is the act of repeating the same thing while hoping to get a different result. At some point, the continual failure of the method to produce the change we want causes us to reject the method because we can't deny its failure any longer. Instead of rejecting methods entirely, we reject the particular method that failed, seek a new method, and get caught in the same loop. This gives methods an infinite capacity for failure. What is required is a completely different approach. To discover a different approach, we have to understand why methods, whatever they are destined to fail. Why does the approach of trying to change psychological problems through force and coercion fail? Loneliness is caused by the way we are conditioned, and only a change in that condition can bring about a change in the loneliness. Force and coercion fail because they do not change the condition responsible for loneliness. Instead, they establish a contradictory condition that battles with it. As such, force and coercion are incapable of psychological change because they leave the condition responsible for loneliness intact. The condition responsible for loneliness is built using knowledge and is based on various understandings we have acquired throughout our lives. A change in the condition responsible for loneliness is only possible when there is a change in the understanding of loneliness. To understand anything, we must observe it. So, to understand loneliness, we must observe loneliness. The observation of loneliness is an entirely different approach to force and coercion, because as we observe loneliness, we are transforming the conditioning responsible for loneliness.
That is to look at loneliness and not move away from that. Then out of that, living with something which you don't understand, which has got tremendous meaning in one's life, then that begins to flower, come out like a beautiful flower and wither away.
Here, Krishnamurti states that the way out of loneliness is to observe it. His statement refers to loneliness, the observation of loneliness, and the ending of loneliness, but neglects to mention two things: the quality of observation that must embrace loneliness, and the door you walk through to end loneliness. So, let's discuss the quality of observation first. Krishnamurti mentioned that to observe loneliness, you must not escape from it. When you do not escape from loneliness, you maintain a connection with it. His statement additionally refers to two things: the observation of loneliness and the transformation of loneliness. Transformation and observation are different, and transformation is not guaranteed simply by observing something. Observation is the ability to see something. Transformation is the ability for what has been seen to change you. The ability to see something is determined by the mind's capacity to be silent. The ability for something to change you is determined by the seriousness you bring to the observation. A casual glance at something has little impact on your conditioning, but a serious examination of something is entirely different. The care and curiosity that embody a serious examination open the mind and make change possible. Seriousness creates a fertile environment for change. Seriousness makes our conditioning malleable. To put it simply, the quality of our observation is determined by a silence of mind, and the outcome of our observation is determined by a seriousness of mind. You can think of silence and seriousness as filters for information. A noisy mind will impede the information we see, and a lack of seriousness will impede the ability for what we see to change us. The ability of a person to change can either be blocked by a noisy mind or a lack of seriousness, which produces various forms of resistance to change. Secondly, we'll discuss the door you walk through to end loneliness. Krishnamurti referenced the end of loneliness, but not the door you walk through to end it. He often neglected to mention the next state on purpose because he felt that people would disregard the inquiry into loneliness and instead pursue the next state he mentioned. He was concerned that people would create a concept of the next state which would then manifest as a sensation in their mind and fool people into believing they had found the real thing when they hadn't. Nevertheless, discussing the next state has significance for people who are in the process of making this transition. This is where a person has inquired into themselves sufficiently to begin to loosen up the conditioning responsible for loneliness, but has yet to see the door that they need to walk through. The door is simply a metaphor, but it can be used as an analogy for understanding the process of transformation. The metaphor of a door conveys the notion of walking up to the door, passing through it, and entering a new area. What actually happens is that through one's inquiry, one becomes aware of a certain quality of mind. That quality is the door. One then inquires into that quality. That is walking through the door. As one inquires into that quality, one becomes that quality. That is the new area. So, to put this in terms of loneliness, through observing loneliness, the mind becomes aware of emptiness. That is the door. The mind then inquires into emptiness. That is walking through the door. As the mind inquires into emptiness, emptiness becomes more prominent in the mind. Thus, the mind becomes emptiness. Transformation, such as the ending of loneliness, is not a sudden end like turning off a light switch. It is a gradual process as the mind continues to observe and comprehend itself. Through this process, the mind moves from one state to another. A state where loneliness is possible to a state where loneliness is not possible. The old state is being dismantled at the same moment the new state is emerging. The new state, K often neglected to mention, is emptiness. As the mind is entering emptiness, it is simultaneously leaving loneliness. During this process, the mind is becoming more content with emptiness, and at the same time, the capacity of the mind to be lonely and the vitality of loneliness is diminishing. The home the mind builds for itself in emptiness is constructed using the ashes of loneliness. The point of departing from loneliness is when the mind discovers emptiness. When the mind discovers emptiness, it is then in a position capable of questioning what place emptiness has in life.
So there it is. Intelligence now says, what am I to do with that emptiness it feels?
Thank you very much for watching. If you would like to see more videos like this, please head over to the YouTube channel. And if you happen to be more of a reader than you are a watcher, please head over to the website because we have books available for download on there. Have a very nice day. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.